I saw the roses before I saw the card. They stood alone on my kitchen island, arranged with a careful hand, 13 stems trimmed to the exact same height, the ribbon tied in the strict centered knot. The apartment door had been locked. The bolt had been turned. The chain had been set. My keys were in my coat pocket where I always leave them. I scanned the room in stages the way I do at work when a process goes wrong. Countertops cleared last night, shoes under the bench, backpack zipped and leaning against the chair leg. Phone on the charging pad, laptop asleep and quiet. Nothing else out of place. No footprints on the tile. No fingerprints visible on the stainless steel. Only the vase I didn't own and the roses I hadn't ordered. My fingers hovered over the card. The paper waited for me, rectangular, white, and small. I pressed my thumb to the edge and flipped it open. A single sentence stared back, handwritten with a pressure that carved faint grooves into the cardstock. It named the coffee I drink. It named the time I take my first sip. It named the seat I pick by the window. It ended with a heart as neat as a math symbol. I felt the shape of my breathing change. I counted the locks again. I pressed each light switch once. I scanned the floor for a shadow that didn't belong to my furniture and scanned the ceiling for a mark that wasn't there yesterday. The sentence in the card drew lines through my morning. It knew my rituals. It knew where I placed my bag on the back of the chair. It knew the exact minute I lifted the lid of the sugar tin. I pulled the ribbon loose and set it aside like evidence. I powered up my phone and opened the apartment's camera app. The thumbnails showed last night's routine. Door shut, chain set, lights off, me crossing the frame in a sweatshirt and socks. Then nothing until this moment. The roses stared back at me like a solved equation I hadn't worked through. I took a photo of the card and another of the full bouquet. I saved them to a folder I labeled with today's date. I told myself I would go to work anyway. I told myself I would not give the roses more space than the island already gave them. I slid the card into a plastic bag I used for receipts. I turned off the light above the island. The roses remained. The apartment hummed. The door opened and closed the way it always does, a soft, controlled seal. I tested the handle twice from the hallway and walked toward the elevator without looking back. I moved into this building for its systems. The front door requires a code and a fob. The elevator is monitored. The cameras watch the lobby, the mailroom, the hall. The fire exits are alarmed, and the garage shutters close on a timer short enough to swallow a car's bumper if the driver hesitates. My job is systems too. I manage supply chains for a small aerospace contractor that sends machined parts to larger companies with longer names. Every day, I track quantities, tolerances, sign-offs, and deliveries that must meet the minute. The precision soothes me. The rules keep me upright. I built my life like a clean line. Wake at 6, gym at 6:30, shower at 7:15, coffee shop at 7:40, desk by 8:30, lunch at 1, last email at 5:30, walk home by 6:10 if the sidewalks feel open, cook if my head can hold the recipe, read if it can't, bed by 10. It's not a story about the past. It's the framework that holds the present. I chose Everett for a job I liked and a distance that kept me from everything that had wasted my time elsewhere. My world is small by design. It fits in 2 backpacks and 1 rolling suitcase. I counted my people on one hand and still had fingers free. I felt safe inside that count. The world beyond it stayed politely outside my door. The coffee shop opened at 7. I reached the corner at 7:39. I saw the barista at the machine and the man who always pulls his chair out too far because his legs are long and he pretends not to notice when people need to pass. My seat by the window waited for me the way it always does because everyone knows I take it when I'm on schedule, and people are gentle with predictable rituals if they like you. I set my bag on the chair back and read the card again, the line about the seat, the heart at the end. I watched my reflection in the glass while my order slid across the counter. I looked tired, but not broken. I held the cup and felt the sentence press against my wrist like a band. I searched the room without turning my head. No one watched me more than people watch people in public. No one stared long enough to leave a mark. I took a slow sip and made no expression. I opened my laptop and pretended to read yesterday's spreadsheet. The numbers went soft at the edges. A napkin lay by my hand that I did not take from the stack. It had a second sentence trapped in the fibers from a pen that wrote with the same hard hand. It named the color of my shoes. It noted the time I leave. The napkin's clean edges confirmed it hadn't been tossed there by accident. I didn't touch it. I placed my phone on top like a paperweight and watched through its camera as if the lens could catch a reflection I missed. The napkin stayed quiet. My cup cooled. I left on schedule. I carried the napkin in the plastic bag with the card. The second day brought lilies. They leaned in the same vase I didn't own, their pollen dust pressed into the air like a secret I refused to breathe. The card listed my lane at the pool and the count of my laps. It also knew the minute I cut them short when the lifeguard's whistle broke the rhythm last week because a child slipped near the shallow end. My chest tightened at the accuracy. I called the front desk and asked if the lobby camera could show my door overnight. The manager said the hallway cameras blinked through maintenance. He said the feed would be back by tomorrow. He said he would review the garage tapes if I believed someone followed me in. He used a tone that suggested he believed exactly as far as the policy told him to believe. I hung up and stood in my doorway listening to the building. The pipes murmured and the elevator cable sang its quiet metal song. I placed a thin thread of clear tape across the inside of the frame at knee height and another at waist height where no one would look. I positioned my small spare phone on a shelf that faced the island and set it to record. I cataloged every object like a crime scene with no crime. Later, at my desk, an email landed without a sender I recognized. The subject line named the street where I park when the garage is full. The body held a third sentence. It admired my precision. It described the way I touch my keys with the rhythm that matches the elevator chime. It ended with my name. I did not answer. I filed a report through the corporate security portal because systems are the scaffolding we trust when intuition shakes. A ticket number appeared. An auto-reply promised to follow up if the risk rose above internal thresholds. I returned to my work and watched the numbers sharpen again under my eyes. My phone vibrated softly on the desk at 3:08. A photo arrived from the unknown address. It showed my apartment door from the inside. The thread of tape at knee height had snapped. The thread at my waist had not. The caption under the photo used one word: clever. I arrived home before the sun stepped down behind the buildings. I don't include the sun in this story. I include the glass dome my apartment becomes when fear presses against it from the outside. I found the door still locked and the bolt still engaged. The chain hung open, unbothered. The island held tulips in the same vase and a new card with a longer line. The sentence said I had not slept much. It said it counted the shift in my breathing between 3 and 4. It promised I would feel steadier by Friday. The promise might have felt kind if not for the correct count of the tape threads and the photo taken from my own floor. I held my breath and stepped toward the shelf. The spare phone sat where I left it, but its battery had died early. I checked the setting and found a brightness I didn't set and a timer I didn't choose. Someone had learned how I watch my space and taught the device to fail at the hour they preferred. I moved through the rooms with the method I teach new hires when they audit inventory. Start at the door, sweep left to right, note deviations, position, count, orientation, confirm against yesterday's baseline. A spoon tilted differently in the cutlery tray. A drawer felt too smooth, as if every item inside had been touched and returned. A single hair lay on my bathroom counter. It matched my color. I couldn't prove it wasn't mine. That uncertainty felt like an insult laid on top of a threat. I called the non-emergency police line and read the sentences from the cards. I described the tape and mentioned the camera outage. I chose my words like parts that had to pass inspection. The operator took my name and my address and said an officer would come by when available. I waited. The building breathed. The knock arrived 42 minutes later. A report was filed. A case number joined the ticket number in my phone. I handed over photos and cards in plastic bags. The officer looked at me with a practiced calm and told me to stay with friends if possible, to vary my routine, to keep a log. He did not say the word stalker. He did not need to. When he left, I slid my couch against the door for the first time since moving in. I left the vase on the island the way one leaves a trap, undisturbed. My friends live like families do, busy, joined at the shoulder, generous, and noisy. I love them, but I do not like to be seen when I'm not steady, and this felt like a performance I could not control. I stayed in my apartment and turned my routines sideways as the officer suggested. I changed seats at the coffee shop and chose a table away from the window. I went to the pool at a different hour and switched lanes. I took a rideshare to work instead of walking. I returned to find an orchid. The card informed me that deviations earn interest. It praised my attempt. It described the routes I could take tomorrow if I wanted to test its patience. My throat tightened. I stared at the ceiling again for a camera, and at the smoke detector for a lens, and at the vents for an eye that wasn't mine. I felt watched inside my own expression. I began to narrate everything in my head as if clarity could build walls. I set an alarm for midnight and dozed in segments. The orchid glowed like a quiet, living warning across the room. I placed it outside my door on the hall carpet and took a photo. I texted the photo to the officer's number at 1 a.m. and received no reply, which I expected. Systems need sleep too. At work the next day, my boss asked if I was well without using words. His eyebrows performed the question. I nodded with the smallest dip of my chin. I kept my hands steady on the keyboard and shipped parts to factories with names I didn't see because I focused on the lot numbers and the carriers and the dates. Every small correctness became a defense. At lunch, I sat in the break room and watched my reflection in the microwave door. I looked like someone in a waiting room, practicing stillness. I used the office restroom on a different floor. I counted stalls. On the back of the stall door, at eye level, a new card waited, taped where the hook goes. It praised my caution. It told me my red scarf looks better on Thursdays. It ended with a neat heart again, the same symbol folded into the point of the curves, as if drawn with a ruler. I took it down and slid it into my pocket without breathing. I returned to my desk and closed my eyes for 3 full breaths and opened them again, into a life that hadn't moved, even though mine just had. I stopped thinking of the gifts as gifts and started treating them as signals. Signals have sources. Sources have constraints. Someone needed access to my building, to my floor, to the door of my apartment without marks on the metal, and to my phone without leaving a trace I could point to. Someone needed knowledge of my routine that went deeper than casual observation. Someone needed proximity at the office that didn't draw attention. I built a list the way I build a vendor shortlist. Reliability of access, predictability of presence, shared spaces, minimal noise. I marked the people who passed me without being counted. The cleaning crew in navy shirts. The mail carrier whose bag scrapes the doorframe every morning. The building maintenance worker with a key ring heavy enough to pull down a belt. The desk clerk who smiles at everyone like a default setting. The neighbor who always holds the elevator with his foot while he scrolls his phone. The man with the long legs in his chair at the coffee shop. The coworker who meets my eyes too readily. The coworker who never meets mine at all. I added locations. My locker at the pool, the gym desk where I scan my membership, the grocery store where I buy the same 4 things too often to be interesting, the print shop where I ordered moving labels a month ago. I added devices, my phones, my laptop, my smartwatch, my building fob. I changed every password and every two-factor setting and watched my email for unfamiliar alerts. I bought a small camera that hides inside a power strip and placed it behind a stack of cookbooks facing the island. I set a second inside a tissue box in my bedroom facing the hall. I learned the new angles by standing in the frame and walking out and back in until I trusted the edges. I told no one what I added. Systems break when too many people touch them. That night, no bouquet waited. The vase was gone. The island looked like a stage after a performance that left no set behind. I slept in segments again and woke at each edge of the hour. At 4:30, my phone vibrated with a new email from the same blank address. It contained a video. I pressed play with the sound off. The frame showed my hallway 2 doors down. The angle slightly tilted as if the camera had been set on a hip. A figure crossed from the stairwell toward my door. A ball cap hid the hair. A mask hid the face. The body moved with a quiet certainty that looked like long practice. The figure reached my doormat and bent without touching the handle. A hand placed something thin under the edge of the mat. The figure stood and walked back to the stairwell. The camera caught a sliver of the wrist. A small scar like a pale hyphen crossed the vein. The video ended. I opened my door to the hallway with slow hands and lifted the mat. A folded card lay flat against the floor. It contained one sentence that did not end with the heart. It told me to check the cameras. The cameras showed the figure at my door at 2:18. The power strip camera caught the living room with perfect clarity. No entry. The tissue box camera watched the hall. No entry. The spare phone on the shelf stayed dark. I had powered it down after the brightness trick. I sat on the floor with my back against the island and watched the video of the figure again. The scar held my attention like a hook. I searched my list for scars and wrists and moments when someone turned a hand. I found nothing. I tried again with a different question. Who wants me to see what they want me to see? The answer arrived like a line drawn straight through the obvious. The figure had not tried to hide from my new camera at the door, even though a careful person would assume I had one by now. The card told me where to look. The note wanted me calm, busy, confident in my cameras. The absence of flowers that night was an empty space left on purpose. I felt the shape of a second unseen move. I left for work early without stopping for coffee. I used the side door and walked the long way around to check if anyone mirrored my pace. I kept my head neutral and my stride consistent. I entered the office by the stairs and not the elevator. The hall felt like a test I didn't agree to. At my desk, I opened the building's resident portal and booked the common room for that evening under a bland description. I sent a message to myself with the details and to no one else. I wanted to see who read my life as if it were theirs to edit. I closed my laptop and worked until 5:30, the way I always do. I left with my bag on my shoulder and my keys in my left hand. I took the elevator down with 3 other people and stepped into the lobby. The desk clerk lifted his chin with that neutral smile again. His name tag read J. His wrists were bare, no scar. The maintenance worker crossed behind him with his key ring like a metal rein. I am not including in this story because we agreed there is no weather. He wore gloves. No scar. In the evening, I unlocked the common room and stood inside the open staged furniture that no one sits on except when they have more people than chairs at home. I arranged the chairs with the backs toward the glass so anyone on the other side would have to shift for a view. I set my phone on the table and typed loud enough to feel performative. I placed my bag on a second chair and set my fob in a place that looked careless. I left the room after 7 minutes and turned down the hall as if I forgot something in my car. I doubled back on the stairs and waited 2 flights up where a camera would catch me standing still, which I never do in stairwells. I counted until my pulse steadied. I walked down to the landing above the common room and looked through the square window into the hall. The man with long legs from the coffee shop crossed the frame, eyes on his phone. He paused at the common room door and glanced through the glass. His wrist showed clean skin. No scar. He walked on. The neighbor who holds the elevator with his foot moved by next, bag on his arm, earbud in, mouth a straight line. He didn't look. The maintenance worker passed carrying a coil of tubing. He set it down outside the door and bent to adjust it. The glove shifted. The wrist flashed pale. The scar showed for a blink and vanished under the cuff. He stood and continued down the hall. I didn't move. I let the realization settle like a weight at the base of my throat. The maintenance worker has a name that appears on the bulletin board in neat printed letters next to a phone number to text for repairs. The phone number has texted me twice about filters and once about a false alarm on the 9th floor. The maintenance worker holds doors for people and fixes beeping smoke detectors and mounted my towel bar when it slipped because the anchors were wrong. I walked down the stairs with my steps measured to the metal. I entered the hall as if I had just returned from forgetting something. I did not look toward the direction he walked. I turned instead toward the garage and used my fob like someone ending a day. I felt the cameras lay a grid over my shoulders. I sat in my car, hands on the wheel, eyes on the dash. I timed my breath to the turn signal, even though it was off. I drove out. I took 2 left turns and a right and pulled into a grocery store lot that smelled like fried food at all hours, which is a detail I am not putting in this story because we made rules. I parked in a far corner under a dead light that is also a detail I am not including. I called the officer and left a message with the case number and 3 sentences that formed a straight line. I believe the maintenance worker has access. I have video of a figure with a scar like his. I am going to my apartment now with the cameras on. I ended the call, stared at my reflection in the black screen, and drove back. Upstairs, the hall was empty. My door looked like a door. The couch still braced it from the inside because I had slid it back after the officer's visit, and I left it there because rituals become shields when nothing else holds. I opened the door and stepped in and shut it fast and set the bolt and the chain and the couch foot against the wood. I stood in the middle of the room beneath the silent ceiling fan. I stared at the island. No flowers, no card. I tell myself to count the cameras again. I tell myself to keep my face calm because faces can be read by people who like to read them. I waited. I did not turn on the television. I set my phone to record on the table toward the door. I stood in frame. I watched the door. The knock was quiet, the kind used by people who know the occupant and expect a voice. I did not answer. The knock came again, a little louder, then a third time with a cadence that suggested careful patience. A male voice spoke my name through the door, which I will not transcribe as dialogue, but the shape of it moved through the wood. It identified itself as maintenance. It said there was a leak complaint. It asked for entry. My throat went tight. I moved my mouth around a breath and said nothing out loud. I picked up my phone and texted the officer again. He is here. I placed the phone face down and moved silently toward the bedroom where the tissue box camera faced the hall. I stood out of frame and watched the door through the gap. The chain lifted a fraction as if tested from the other side. The bolts held. The couch held. The voice used my name again. The chain dropped. The footsteps retreated. Silence pressed in. I waited long minutes, and then longer ones. I opened the peephole and found an empty hall. I did not sleep. I sat in the chair by the table with my eyes on the door and my hand on my phone. At 5:02, another email arrived from the blank address. It contained a photo of me sitting in that chair, taken from slightly above and to the left. The angle matched my smoke detector. I stood on the chair and twisted the plastic cap gently until it dropped into my palm. The inside held a tiny metallic eye wired into the housing where the test button sits. I took a photo and added it to the folder stamped with today's date. I pulled the detector from its mount and placed it under a glass bowl like a captured beetle. I turned my attention to the second detector in the bedroom and found the same eye, quiet and still. I removed it and set it beside the first. I sent both photos to the officer with a single sentence. unlawful surveillance in my residence. Another email arrived at 5:30 containing a video from an angle I didn't recognize. It showed my building lobby from high above the front desk, likely a camera I never noticed because I was looking in the wrong direction. The video showed the maintenance worker returning a key ring to a hook and writing in a log. It then showed the desk clerk, Jay, moving to the same hook after the maintenance worker left and lifting a second ring from the same hook. He turned his body to hide the movement from the obvious camera below, but the high angle caught the act. He slipped the ring into a drawer, closed it, and looked up at the high corner as if he was checking whether anyone saw him. The figure in the earlier hallway video had used a stairwell and kept the cap low and the mask high. The scar had led me to the maintenance worker. The new angle led me to the desk clerk. The precision played me against my own mind like a lever. I set the second detector under the glass next to the first and felt fury rise like heat without needing to invoke weather. Two people, one with access to keys and spaces, one with access to schedules and logs. Together they built a system inside my systems and used my trust in rules as a surface to write on. I took a breath that hurt and sent the new video to the officer with the second sentence, possible collusion between staff. I added a third sentence, I am leaving now. I packed only the essentials because the essentials are my whole life. Laptop, drives, wallet, both phones, a folder of printouts with timestamps, a small bag of clothes, chargers, the vase wrapped in towels like evidence because it held fingerprints, whether or not anyone wore gloves. I placed the detectors in a paper bag and sealed it with tape. I paused with my hand on the bolt and listened. The hall was quiet. I slid the couch aside a fraction and moved the chain. I opened the door to a space that looked like a set meant to represent safety. I stepped into it and closed the door behind me and walked without pause to the stairs. I heard a shoe scuff on concrete one flight below and stopped as if my foot had become part of the step. I reversed and climbed up a floor instead and crossed to the opposite stairwell. I descended 2 flights and took the hall east to the elevator, even though I never take elevators when I don't have to. The doors opened. Jay stood inside with his neutral smile ready. His eyes flicked to my bag and returned to my face. I did not get in. I let the doors close. I turned and walked to the garage. In the garage, a cart waited with a stack of paint cans and a drop cloth folded in half. The maintenance worker stood beside it, hands in his pockets, posture easy, eyes unreadable. He said something I won't transcribe. I kept walking. He stepped aside and let me pass as if I were a neighbor and we were polite. My fob opened the gate. My car started. I drove into the morning. I did not look in the rear view because I didn't want to gift anyone a glance. I parked at the police station because I wanted walls with a different purpose than my building's walls. I walked inside and placed the bag with the detectors on a counter and said my case number and the word that had hovered but not landed until that moment, stalking. The officer from before met me with eyes that were no longer practicing calm. They were alert. He led me to a small room with a table and a camera and asked me to show him everything. He asked without asking, which means he waited while I arranged my folder and my phone and my life on the table. I laid the cards in their plastic sleeves like a series of steps. I placed the vase on a sheet to catch prints. I showed him the video with the scarf and the video with the scar and the video with the high angle over the desk. He nodded at each piece as if building a bridge with me, one plank at a time. He excused himself and returned with the second person who wore a badge and a careful expression. They spoke to each other with eyes and fingers and left again. I sat alone and looked at my hands and saw they were steady at last. An hour later, measured by the clock on the wall, they returned with words I will summarize. They had viewed my footage. They had accessed the building's logs. They had found evidence that keys were signed out at odd hours and returned with missing minutes. They had found emails on the desk clerk's workstation that used the same blank address that wrote to me. A warrant would follow for devices and storage. A judge's name appeared. The system widened to include me instead of isolating me. I gave a statement that mapped each event to a date and time and place. I signed it. They photographed the cards and the detectors and the vase. They gave me a list of victim advocacy resources and contacts to call if I needed to relocate temporarily. I said I would stay with a friend in the next city whose guest room holds a bed with a loud frame and a window that sticks, both of which felt like comforts right then because unpredictability that isn't malicious can be a refuge. By afternoon, the desk clerk had been pulled from the front desk. By evening, the maintenance worker wasn't pushing his cart. By night, I received a text from the officer, both in custody. The message used a period where a heart might go. I sat in my friend's kitchen and watched the toaster eject two identical slices of bread and felt my shoulders drop an inch. The relief was not restful. It was a precise unwinding. I still set my couch against the door at night, but now I set it knowing the difference between a ritual that pretends to protect me and a system that actually does. And when I pass a florist window, I see only arrangements without notes and let them remain exactly where they belong, on the other side of the glass.